Hi there, this is Afro Perspectives. Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime has recently announced it will soon allow Zimbabweans who received farms under the fast-track land reform program to sell that land to other Zimbabweans who wish to use that same land. The first question that pops in anyone's lips is why now? The answer is simple. Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime is looking at its own long-term survival. Zanu PF, with Emmerson Mnangagwa and his underlings as candidates for any election, will not win that election if it were held under free and fair conditions. They have to find crafty ways to buy off those whose loyalty it needs to cheat through an election. The chiefs have been bought through fancy Isuzu cars. It's time now for a big payout for those who benefited from the land reform program. The majority of these are loyal Zanu PF supporters, and most of the chefs, former cabinet ministers, and military generals come under this bracket. For a start, most of the past owners of these farms, the white commercial farmers, have always insisted that they ought to be compensated, with the cost of that compensation estimated at close to $4 billion American dollars. Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime is broke, but those former commercial farmers are still owed their money, and the debt needs to be settled. Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime proposes a willing seller, willing buyer sort of arrangement where any Zimbabweans who wants a farm can buy one. However, most of the people who got farms under the fast-track land reform program did not pay even a single cent for these farms. Advisors to Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime are the sort of people whose main role is to come up with very creative get-rich-quick schemes. There is no other way to call these sort of arrangements. Take, for instance, Bona Mugabe. 2 years ago, when she was in the process of divorcing Simba Chikore, we got to know that she is the proud owner of 21 farms. And now let's look at the case of one farmer named Guy Watson Smith, whose farm was taken over by Solomon Mjuru. He claimed that the value of improvements on his farm was $3 million US, and claimed that as compensation, he would want the $3 million US, although the courts later reduced the amount to half that amount. Now, most of the farmers whose farms were taken over by the politically connected elites in Zanu PF have not been compensated. That is the case for all of them. So if Bona Mugabe were allowed to sell 21 farms, how much money does he stand to make? Well, the figures are mouth-watering. Most of the chefs in Zanu PF own 2 to 3 farms each. So someone who has been sitting on a farm for which he paid nothing is now allowed to sell it on. This is looting on an industrial scale. 24 years is a long time, and it is also enough time for most of these chefs who have been sitting on vast tracts of land to claim that they now own the farms. Most of them have no experience in farming whatsoever. So they have been leasing the land back to the original owners of the farms, the white commercial farmers. Renting a farm is not that profitable, but as you can see for yourself, millions can be made from selling on a farm. Advisors to Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime have certainly done their homework. The majority of farmers who lost their farms 24 years ago were local Zimbabweans, and they just happened to be white. However, some of them were foreigners, Dutch, Germans, and the French to be precise. Those were covered under treaties the government signed with the Dutch and other European governments. Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime has promised to pay these farmers, 94 of them, $20 million US. However, to pay the nearly 5,000 farmers who were dispossessed of their land 24 years ago, the local farmers, that is, the government need close to $4 billion US, like I said above. Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime has proposed to give the Zanu PF chefs who are sitting on their farms title deeds so they can sell them on. So the 3 billion or 4 billion US dollars figure, depending on how you compute the figures, has to come from somewhere. It's the buyers of these farms, the Zanu PF chefs, are counting on. However, there is a small problem with Emmerson Mnangagwa's plan. Most of the commercial farmers whose farms were confiscated by the government 24 years ago had title deeds. The government cancelled or ignored those title deeds. So 24 years down the line, Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime wants to issue a new set of title deeds to those Zanu PF chefs. Then they sell the land, pocket the millions. The problem is that the government cannot be trusted. In the past, they have used their tried and tested methods of settling land ownership, and that does not include the issue. That did not include the issuing of title deeds or respecting the title deeds that were owned by the former commercial farmers. The title deeds were recognized by the courts, and then the government of the then Robert Mugabe went on and ignored the courts, the decisions from the courts, rulings from the courts. Instead, it in place of title deeds, it used the so-called offer letters, and those were accompanied by staged farm invasions. So whoever does not have political connections lives under the threat of staged farm invasions, as we saw in the past. If the farmer happens to be white, then they are the perfect target. 3 weeks ago, for instance, villagers invaded Strathmore farm in Banket. The Herald, that mouthpiece of the Zanu PF regime, decided that the villagers had been invited to gather damaged potatoes. But in fact, this was another invasion of a farm, and the owner at this point in time is a politically connected judge. So that saved the farmer. The farmer's name was Jonathan McQuaid, and according to some reports in the press. So you can see for yourself the trap Zanu PF is laying for anyone gullible enough to invest in the land. They will get the money from the farm sales, and once they have gotten hold of the cash, then they orchestrate another wave of farm invasions. But then the other issue that we have to consider is that without the original owners of the farms receiving adequate compensation, the Zanu PF chefs who are sitting on these farms have no recognized title to those farms. 24 years ago, the courts ruled, like I have said above, that the farm seizures were illegal in terms of Zimbabwean law. The government ignored those court rulings. It was illegal to invade farms at that point in time. But now, what has changed is that the judiciary we had 24 years ago was independent and was actually interpreting the law in terms of fairness and justice. But now what we have is a captured judiciary. And in the case of another wave of invasions, the courts are likely to decide the cases in terms of what their political masters in Zanu PF want, which is not according to the law, but according to the political whims of the elites in Zanu PF. So you see the problem we have. It's essentially a question of trust, is the absence of rules of fairness, the rule of law. So in order to sell these farms, the Zanu PF chefs have to convince the banks that they are the owners at law. And I do not see how this is going to happen without the original owners of the farms, the white farmers, getting compensation. It's not only compensation for the farms. Some of the farmers lost their lives fighting to save their farms. So the government has this onerous task of tracking down the farmers who are scattered in places like Australia, New Zealand, and some of them have even gone to places here in Africa like Zambia and Nigeria, or even the places like Democratic Republic of Congo. So if Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime was interested in fairness, it should let the Zanu PF chefs who are sitting on the farms at this point in time pay for those farms at the commercial rate or the full market value to the government itself, since the government says it is the owner of land in all of Zimbabwe. And then the simple issue is that in terms of fairness, those Zanu PF chefs who are currently sitting on the farms, who cannot actually pay for those farms they are occupying, they should hand over the farms to the government. It's as simple as that. However, that would drive a coach and a horse through Emmerson Mnangagwa's plan. The plan is actually to give title deeds to the Zanu PF chefs for the farms that they are currently sitting on, farms they actually do not own. And you can see for yourself, it's a plan to create a new class of millionaires overnight. The farms occupied by Zanu PF chefs have been sources of enrichment and looting of state resources at an industrial scale. Remember the grand looting carried out through the farm mechanization program. Gideon Gono had to stand in parliament and in front of MPs and could not explain how he had used nearly 200 million US dollars, which was used under the farm mechanization program. And those with political connections at that point in time got free inputs such as fertilizers and seed, and then they sold them on the open market. They were supposed to have got loans, and they were supposed to pay back the loans, which they never did. So now you see what the problem we have here. The land reform program and the farms, they have been used to enrich a certain class of people. And having this sort of this sort of background, this sort of history, why do we have to take Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime at its word when we have all these instances where people have been fleeced, where people have been conned, where people have been ripped off? So now you have advisors to Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime. They have hashed a new plan. The money the Zanu PF chefs got from such initiatives as the farm mechanization program and command agriculture was loose change. Now they are in for a massive killing and one last big paycheck. And to do that, they have got to get title deeds and offload those farms on the gullible. And those Zanu PF chefs, they will be running all the way to the bank with millions of dollars. So after 24 years, Zanu PF chefs, the big wigs and those with political connections sitting on vast tracts of farmland and in some instances doing nothing on them, why has Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime finally decided it needs to do something? For a start, Zimbabwe as a country is in what they are referring to as debt distress. And what that means is simply that the country owes international lenders a lot of money. And the country is behind with these payments, and in some cases, it cannot afford to meet its monthly payments. The country owes a staggering 17.7 billion US dollars to the International Monetary Fund and other international creditors. So what that means is that the country, they are trying to get back on good terms with the IMF and other international lenders. And then what they have to do is they have to find some way of paying back the money the country owes, and then they have to do things like negotiating the terms under which they are paying these debts. And to do that, they have to show that whoever they owe money, including the former white commercial farmers, they can actually pay them, and they are doing that in good faith. So you can see for yourself, it's not just a simple question of trust in the government of Zimbabwe and its institutions. In 2020, the government agreed that it owed the original white farmers and agreed to pay compensation amounting to 3.5 billion US dollars, and that money is now debt to the farmers. Although the farmers are local Zimbabweans, most financial institutions consider the settling of debts to the farmers a first start in restoring the credibility of Zimbabwe as a country that can be trusted to meet its obligations. So this is where we are. The idea to give title deeds to the Zanu PF chefs, this is where it comes in. On the other hand, Emmerson Mnangagwa's regime is trying to please international lenders, and at the same time, the government is trying to please a segment of its supporters. But why not let the Zanu PF chefs who are already on the farms pay for the value of those farms in exchange for title deeds to the farms? That won't make political sense as Zanu PF has to take care of its own long-term survival. It is a government short on legitimacy, and when the opportunity presents itself, it has to take care of its supporters first. Anything that involves Zanu PF and its supporter base, the so-called chefs, the war veterans, and elites from the security services, it presents opportunities for a looting spree. When it comes to making farms available for those willing to buy them, banks prefer 99-year leases as proof of ownership. As it stands, the Zanu PF chefs on the farms, all they have are the so-called offer letters. The offer letters are nothing but a piece of paper from the Ministry of Lands giving the person holding it the right to evict the rightful owner. Offer letters have been used by the chefs to acquire multiple farms. There are loads of instances where those with political connections have used gone on to a printer and typed up an offer letter, and they have acquired farms. So you can see what how the system has abused. Then, as it stands, the Zanu PF chefs on all the farms, all they have are the so-called offer letters. Offer letters have been used, like I've just said before, have been used by the chefs to acquire multiple farms. So the question is, someone like Mnangagwa with 21 farms, is she going to get title deeds to all those farms? Such a scenario presents an opportunity for enrichment on a massive scale. If that second version of the land reform process, if one can call it that, were to fail, it's the Zimbabwean taxpayer who ends up paying for the government's get-rich-quick schemes for its elite. Thank you for tuning in, and if you found this topic of discussion interesting, please drop your comments in the box below and attend Siyabonga. Thank you. Bye.